This conference will now be recorded.
Oh, perfect. Today is Wednesday, September 13th, 2023, and I'd like to call today's work session to order. Clerk, may I have roll call?
Councilmember Fox,
Absent and excused.
Councilmember Kasberg,
Here.
Councilmember Boyle,
Absent and excused.
Councilmember Leija,
Present.
Councilmember Cerveny,
Present.
Mayor Strobin.
Here. Thank you, clerk. All right, tonight we have a presentation. Mr. Ethan Spoo will be presenting the FEMA Maps. And Brian Cast, well, we'll hold off on that one. You're not presenting together at the same time, right?
Unless we want to
Two
really
different.
confuse you.
Okay, good. All right. Thank you, Ethan.
Good evening. So I'm going to be talking to you tonight about the city's updates to its frequently flooded areas ordinance. And these updates are promulgated by requirements under the National Flood Insurance Program. There's two essential components to these updates that I'm going to be talking to you about. The first is the updates to the what are called the flood insurance rate maps that FEMA puts out, and those are maps that assess what the flood risk is within the center, and there's maps, similar maps all over the country, and those maps are used to provide flood insurance to property owners that are located in flood hazard areas. And so the maps that you see in front of you on the screen compare what the city's existing firm map panels are there kind of on the left. I apologize, these are kind of merged together a little bit, but the colored areas in the middle of the map are the East Fork of the Lewis River, and then north of that you have downtown. South of that you have the Timmon Landing area. And so the maps have essentially two risk areas. The red area is what's called the floodway, and the blue area is the floodplain. And the floodplain is the area where there's a 1% chance in any given year of there being a flood, according to FEMA's methodology. So anyways, that's the existing map. FEMA is proposing to update this to include new areas along the southern reaches of Breezy Creek. And you can see those circled there in green on the right-hand side. And so there's essentially 5 or 6 properties that will now be included in these special flood hazard areas that will be able to obtain flood hazard insurance, assuming the city adopts this ordinance. The flip side of that is that the development on those properties will have to obtain a floodplain permit. And the city's floodplain administrator is the building official. So the schedule for these updates is that the city has to complete this by November 2nd of this year, so that it can offer flood hazard insurance, or insurance companies can offer flood hazard insurance within the center. So I'm going to talk to you just really quickly about some of the code updates that are being undertaken. So we're going to be referencing these new maps that FEMA is producing into the updated code, and that will make the maps effective upon adoption of the new code. But there's other types of code updates that we're undertaking also. And as I said, all of these code updates are generated by the need to comply with the National Flood Insurance Program and the standards that are contained in federal code. So one type of updates that we're making is to the definitions section of the city's critical areas ordinance, and these flood hazard standards are contained in the city's critical areas ordinance. So we're going to be updating definitions. Some examples of those are provided for you in the memo that we produced, briefing you on this item, but they include, really just kind of a variety of both new and amended definitions, including updating the definitions for flood and flooding, flood insurance rate map, floodway, what new construction is, structure, substantial improvement, and area of special flood hazard. And in each of those cases, really all we're doing is just mimicking what is in the National Flood Insurance Program. I should also mention that we have been consulting with the local FEMA administrator in this area, and they reviewed the city's code and provided some guidance on what needed to be updated. One of the other updates that we're going to be undertaking is revising the review process for floodplain permits in the city's code. And so currently there's a table, and I think that, Katrina, if I can get you to turn to this, it's on page 19 of the agenda packet. Yes, sorry, within the ordinance. Yeah, right there, that table is near the bottom, starting at the bottom of that page. And so what this does is it tells you what type of activity requires review under the city's critical areas ordinance. And so if it says CAR, that last column is the frequently flooded areas column. And so that's the changes that we're talking about here tonight. And so if it says CAR, that means it requires a critical areas report. If it says RR, that means there's a review required. And then if there's an E further down in the table, that means it's exempt from review under the city's critical areas ordinance. But in consultation with FEMA, we've determined that this table does not line up with the National Flood Insurance Program. And the reason is primarily because of exemptions that are listed here. For instance, vegetation removal, grading in some cases is considered development by FEMA and requires a floodplain permit. So the city doesn't have if it wants to be compliant with the National Flood Insurance Program, the city doesn't have the authority to call out its own exemptions that are different from what's contained in the National Flood Insurance Program. We're also amending the duties of the local administrator. And as I said, the local administrator is the city's building official. And so the building official, the floodplain administrator, is responsible for keeping certain records like the elevation of buildings above the base flood elevation, for instance. And so we're amending what their responsibilities are in this ordinance, and adding some records that they need to keep, and again, consistent with the National Flood Insurance Program. There's also a provision that allows for the city to grant variances for historic structures, and that's a provision that allows for flexibility. So if you have a historic structure on a site, then this allows you to keep that historic structure without having to, for instance, completely elevate it or something like that, or flood proof that building, because that would no longer make it a historic structure. So there's some flexibility being incorporated in the code as well. There are going to be some new provisions about storage of materials in special flood hazard areas. And so that includes storage of dangerous materials, things that, hazardous materials to humans and plants and animals. And there will be a prohibition on storing those things within the special flood hazard area. And then for other types of materials that are not hazardous, you can store those in the frequently flooded or the special flood hazard area, but they would have to be anchored, or they have to be able to be moved quickly if a flood is coming. Lastly, there's something called a CLOMAR, CLOMR, which is a conditional letter of map revision. And this is one of the optional updates that we're making, but it's being recommended to us again by FEMA. And so if the city is going to develop within the floodway, which is the highest risk area, it can process a CLOMAR, which is change to the flood risk maps to take those areas out of the floodway. So those are some highlights for you on this. There isn't a particular recommendation for you tonight because, again, this is just kind of a first look, giving you a first look at the updates that we're going to make, planning to make to the ordinance. Planning Commission did recommend approval of these changes to you last night. And so we're anticipating that these will come in front of the council on October 11th in a public hearing. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ethan. Any questions?
Yeah, I was just, if you can go back to that map that we were looking at just a minute ago. How many properties within that green area are actually going to be, could actually be affected?
It's probably 5 or 6 properties. And so there's about 4 to 5 north of 4th Street there, and then 1 property south of 4th Street, which is the school district property. I don't know if you can zoom in on that a little bit more, Katrina, on the right-hand side there. Yeah, where the green is. I wanted to mention, though, that we've given those property owners notice that this is happening, and invited them to come to, for instance, the Planning Commission public hearing last night, and we're going to continue to notice them about the meetings that are going to, that are happening, so they're in the know on what's going on here.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just so you know, no one did come to last night's meeting, so the open. No residents came for the meeting last night, as he invited. And the Planning Commission was pretty unanimous on this.
So once this is adopted, Ethan, how are the property owners notified as far as the insurance aspect?
We could provide notice to them of final adoption. That might make some sense. Other than that, it would be sort of, I guess, their obligation to go out and purchase that flood insurance if they're interested in it.
I think so much of it ends up becoming educational aspect for the property owners until after the fact, after they're impacted. So if that's something we could reasonably take ownership of, I think that would be helpful.
And that's the reason, that's the very reason why we're trying to notice these folks ahead of time, not to catch them by surprise.
I know.
Yeah.
Getting them into the building is half, the biggest battle.
Right.
And Liz brings up, our Councilmember Cerveny brings up a great point. Education of the people, just when it comes to like the historical homes or historical buildings and such, would they have to have the variance already done by the city beforehand? So this way it was on record before they went for the insurance or anything like that in case something does happen? Or is this something that, how would that work? And if that's the case, that comes back to what Councilmember Cerveny just talked about, educating the people so that way they know how the steps work and they can be prepared before it happens.
Yeah, so in the case of the historic structures provisions, those are triggered by renovations or improvements to the building. So if somebody that's located in the special flood hazard areas, these colored areas on the map, comes in to make changes to their property, and it's a historic property, then at that point, the city would tell them that they need to get a floodplain permit to do that or apply for our variance, to the frequently flooded area standards that would normally require things like flood proofing or raising the structure 1 foot above the base flood elevation. But to the educational point, I think that would be a good idea. And Brian can comment here, but it might make sense to reach out to these 5 or 6 property owners and say, invite them into a direct conversation and say, this is what's happening. This is how it's going to affect you. And here's how you can stay involved.
Yeah, I think upon adoption, we can draft a letter and send them out to the affected property owners. I also think it's worth noting that I don't believe that there are any existing historic or other structures in these areas. So, not really anticipating any impact from these changes on any structures or anything like that.
Thanks, Ethan.
Any other questions?
Would the residents be able to know how much the water would have to raise before it would even get to them?
I think what you're asking is what is the flood
Let me put my turban on.
plain elevation in these areas? And so Katrina, if you wouldn't mind scrolling sort of back to the middle of this map graphic here, and that little legend there in the middle, there's 2 different types of what FEMA calls A zones. A zones are the mapped flood plains. And so where it says zone AE, which are the reds and the blues, those are areas where they know what the based flood elevation is. But areas in green do not have an elevation. And so if somebody comes in to develop their property that's located within the green area, potentially they would have to look at doing some kind of a study to assess what that base flood elevation is. So they know, if they were going to, for instance, put a new structure on their property, they know how much to elevate it. I'm not, to be honest with you, I'm not completely clear on why FEMA doesn't always have flood hazard elevations mapped for every area. But for this reach, these lower reaches of Breezy Creek, they unfortunately don't have those mapped elevations.
The reason I even asked that question is because when I lived in Battleground, we got notice that we were in a floodplain, but the water would have had to have risen 300 feet before it would even, because our house sit up high. And so I always wondered how do people, we didn't even go out and get flood insurance because it would be like a 200-year flood or something. And I just wondered if these people had that opportunity to make that choice of whether they wanted to get flood insurance if it wasn't something that imminent.
I think you always have the opportunity to get flood insurance or not if you're in these mapped areas. If you don't get flood insurance, obviously, then you're potentially taking on some additional risk if it turns out that you're, actually within an area that's going to flood. But the other thing I'll say is I talked about the remapping of some of the floodways under that CLOMAR provision that I was talking about. And so there's a process where FEMA can change its flood risk maps and the city can apply for map changes by submitting hydrologic studies and so forth to change those mapped areas. And so that's kind of the process for doing that. And, in that case, that's probably something that affects multiple property owners, isn't just one property. So that's, probably, if that were to happen, that's probably something that the city itself would have to look into, I'm guessing. I don't know if Brian, if you've ever been through a CLOMAR process. But.
No, I haven't, but I'm thinking that it's something that you may want to explore. You can see there in this green circle that, a lot of the upstream area from 4th Street, there's that pool there. And I think that's contributed by the culvert that's planned to be replaced with our 4th Street widening project. So, as we replace that structure, I'm guessing that the zone A may change. So we may want to look at that. going through a Clomar as we complete that project in the next few years.
It's going to be a larger culvert, right?
It'll be a bridge, yeah.
So some of these studies, though, you can actually find on the GIS site, right? When they do developments and such, you can see that they had to do these studies, and it tells you if you're in the floodplains and such, right? Is that correct? So when FEMA redoes it, does that mean that the county is going to update their maps?
Well, floodplain administration, the federal government passes that off to local jurisdictions. And so each local jurisdiction is responsible for, applying to FEMA to change its maps and so forth. But yeah, you're right. So if there's been development in the floodplain, you can go on the county's GIS site and see what studies have been submitted for that. And that's for developments that have already happened.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Ethan.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Look forward to seeing it back in October. All right, next up is Mr. Brian Cast presenting the capital projects budget.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, council. As the mayor just mentioned, today we're looking at the proposed 2024 capital budget, and that includes not only projects but equipment as well that we're including in this. So I've broken this down into department segments. We'll start off with sewer here and go through some of the proposed equipment and project that the sewer department's looking at doing next year. First of this is a diesel sewer backup pump. Estimated cost of this piece of equipment, $75,000. And this piece of equipment would serve as an emergency backup in case of power failure and generator failure. So we have several sewer lift stations throughout town right now. They all do have emergency backup generator except for one of them, which uses a portable backup generator. So if there was a power failure and the generator didn't come on for some reason, this pump could be brought out and could basically operate the station normally. Otherwise, if there's no pumping action, these basically will overflow at a certain point. They also can use this pump in case one of the actual pumps themselves fails during repair of that pump. The pump stations are all currently set up to be able to have this basically just plug and play. They were designed for something like this to be able to be connected to them. So really this is sort of a backup to the backup, but you don't necessarily want to have sewer overflow. So it's something that our wastewater supervisor, Jay, brought forward as a recommendation for next year's budget. And I'm just going to keep going. If you have any questions on these, feel free to jump in. And then at the end, I'll also have some time for feedback. Next item on the sewer budget, odor control media, and the proposed budget for this is $30,000. So right now, the air from the treatment plant goes through a media filter. There's 3 chambers to this media filter, sort of like a pre-filter, a mid-filter, and an end filter. In the past, we've been replacing this every 8 or so years. Actually, currently, we're undergoing some testing to try and figure out how long that lasts so we can determine a regular replacement schedule. And the goal is to kind of figure out, okay, we can replace, the first one, we need to do that every 4 years, and then that preserves the second one so we can replace that at a less frequent interval. And we can go about this in a little bit smarter way. But pending the results of that testing, we're budgeting to replace 2 of the 3 chambers media currently.
Brian, I don't see it saying anything in there about smelling like roses.
Well, the idea of it's like a charcoal media, so hopefully it smells like nothing. But if it's not there, then yeah, it's not super pleasant. So,
Brian, is there a cost to dispose of the replaced media?
no, it's really something that can just be disposed of in a landfill. It's a special form of activated charcoal, so it's not like a hazardous material or anything like that that requires any sort of
Is there
special
enough of it
disposal.
that it has to be hauled off separately, or can it go in the dumpster?
That I'm not sure. I think it could probably fit into the dumpster. The whole media holder is not much larger than the dumpster, or probably about the same size. So if we're not replacing all the media in it, I think we could probably dispose of that over time through the dumpster.
Thank you.
Yes. Next on the sewer budget is a turbidity remeter replacement. And this is to replace a piece of equipment that failed earlier this year. And staff, rather than replacing it immediately, requested that we put this in next year's budget. It's something that is not required for our permit compliance, but it does help the staff basically monitor the sewer control and treatment process and adjust process. Basically, it tells you how transparent the water is or not. Next item is some new lab equipment for fecal coliform and ammonia testing. And this is one that the Budget Advisory Committee asked for a little bit more information on. So I did a little bit of discussion with our sewer folks and learned that the reason that they're requesting this equipment is to replace some existing outdated equipment. This will basically be improved testing equipment. It'll save about an hour and a half a week of staff time. And will also be able to give us better data and more precise data that we may need in future wastewater permits. Next items we have, and I guess I mostly wanted to just draw the council's attention to these. They are already included in the baseline budget that I think you've seen already. But I just wanted to highlight some of the preventive maintenance work that the sewer group is doing down there. So we are, or Jay, our wastewater supervisor, has established a annual preventative maintenance contract for several of our pieces of equipment, including the headwork screens, which is the screens that all the water comes through as it enters the plant and it gets all the large bits out. Our air blowers, which provide oxygen to the biological treatment process, and then lift station 1, which is the main lift station down there at the plant that elevates all the wastewater up to headworks. So he has procured annual service contracts for all those pieces of equipment that includes oil analysis, regular maintenance and vibration testing so that we can identify if a piece of equipment is starting to have an issue before it actually fails. So in the long run, this will really save us money, rather than having a $10,000 blower fail and self-destruct. Hopefully we can catch that ahead of time and make repairs. So better reliability and better cost effectiveness. I guess I'll pause there and see if there's any other questions on sewer before we move into streets.
No, thank you.
All right, so next item in streets, and this is similar to what we did this year where we added or allocated some additional funding to pavement preservation. This year we used it to chip seal Highland Drive up by the high school. And basically this graph here is intended to kind of illustrate how preventative maintenance can reduce costs for maintaining your pavement's life cycle. So what would cost $1 a square foot to do as a slurry seal? Basically, if you don't do that, then your road continues to degrade and you have to do more expensive repairs. So if you skip your slurry or chip seal and the road continues to fail, eventually you get to a point where you have to mill and repave the roadway. That costs about 6 times the amount of the slurry seal. And if you miss that opportunity and the road actually fails and you need to construct it, it costs about 15 times the amount. So this is something that really is important to stay on top of pavement maintenance. This $150,000 will be a good start. I wanted to also draw council's attention to something that will be considered later on the consent agenda, and that this evening, and that is a pavement analysis that we are working with our asset management software company iWorQ on. So on the consent agenda this evening, you'll see a $15,000 one-time charge to have them come out, and they will be assessing all of the streets within the city to see what the current condition of the pavement is, and then we can use that data to project not only how the pavement will degrade over time, and we can pinpoint then, okay, we need to do preventative maintenance on this segment of pavement or this one, and it'll help us really refine our program. So as we have that data next year, we'll have some additional conversations with council about sort of what the current state of our roadways are, and we can also use that data to project how much money we need to be investing annually to keep our roads in good shape, basically.
Is any of this money going to go to make those repairs on Stone Creek where the pavement's bubbling, or is that a separate?
That's something, I mean, it probably will fall largely under the streets and pavement preservation program, but I don't think it'll take this whole budget. Those areas are something that, I think we'll probably need to be addressing next year, if not sooner. And this is sort of a unique issue. We have a sewer line that comes down the hill, and they put these bentonite clay dams in the trench line to try and stop groundwater from flowing down that trench line. The bentonite then absorbed water and swelled up, which is what's caused those little bumps. They've actually, you can see they've cut it out and removed those one time, and then the clay continued to swell. So we're hoping it's done swelling at this point. But yeah, that is, it's kind of an odd situation there.
Isn't that a warranty issue, Brian?
That was going to be my next question.
I don't know the answer to that. I can talk to the city engineer about that. I know he's been extensively involved in the repair of those. All right, next on the streets is a sidewalk grinding project, $25,000. And this is something that we would anticipate becoming a regular part of our budget in the future. Currently, our city code requires that adjacent property owners maintain their sidewalk. So if there's a damaged piece or a panel gets raised up and creates a tripping hazard, per our code, it's on that property owner to actually, tear out and repair or whatever they need to do to fix that. However, if someone, trips on that and the city is aware that there is a tripping hazard there, there's potential liability to the city if we're not actively following our code and really holding people's feet to the fire. And, it can be relatively expensive for a property owner to have, a concrete company come in and remove and replace a panel. So something that I've seen work well in other jurisdictions is to have the city take the initiative with a sidewalk grinding contract. And basically what that does is they can, some of these raised panels up to about a 2 or 2.5 inch lip, they can grind off and make ADA compliance, which reduces the liability. And then basically that'll control about 90% or so of the sidewalk issues that we see out there. So the proposal is that the city takes the lead on that. Depending council's direction, the city can just cover that cost. And then if there's more extensive repairs, then we can work with the property owners to repair those. Another potential option is that the city, notifies the property owner, makes this repair, and then bills them for the work. And there's an economy of scale because the city will be doing $25,000 worth of work instead of just one segment at a time. But so that's something that we would request some feedback from the council on. Potentially, if they want us to reimburse this, it's either going to be a $25,000 project that we're potentially getting some reimbursement from property owners on, or just a $25,000 cost with no reimbursements pending that direction.
Oh, you want it right now?
Whenever, but
No.
I guess right now the feedback would be, do you want us to have us proceed with that project? And we can determine if we're billing people later.
I think it depends on what's causing it. If it's a tree in a residential neighborhood, then that's the tree is on private property affecting the sidewalk, then I think that's something that we should talk with the landowner about. But if it's, something along one of the main roads and it's because of erosion or or water lines or something along those lines, then I think a case by case basis might be more appropriate.
Okay. That makes sense. We can get some additional feedback to you later. We don't necessarily need to decide this evening. Next item, and this is another decision point here, street sweeper. So we had talked earlier this year about budgeting about $50,000 or so to replace our 2001 sweeper with a newer used unit. The current sweeper that we have, we bought, I think it's coming up on 10 years or so ago from City of Camas, and it was a used piece of equipment, and it's worked pretty well, but it's basically way past its service life, and we're spending about a third of our time that is dedicated to the sweeper is spent on repairing it. So, our options are another used sweeper in the $50,000, kind of depends on how old it is, range, and we can probably get another 8 to 10 years out of that. Or there is a grant program that's out currently through the State Department of Ecology that uses some of the Volkswagen Dieselgate settlement funds to replace petroleum powered equipment with electric equipment. So it's a $150,000. It's an 80% grant coverage, so it's about a $750,000 piece of equipment. So our match would be about $150,000. And this is another one that the Budget Advisory Committee asked for some more information on. So I had Amy do some research on this. The typical sweeper, and this is one particular model here. That's name I'm forgetting right now, but get about 11 hours a run on a charge. And jurisdictions that have implemented these have seen reduced maintenance costs because a lot of the issues that you run into with the diesel powered sweeper, they actually have two different engines. They have the drive, the truck engine basically, and then they have a separate diesel engine that runs all the fans and blowers and brushes. And most of the maintenance issues we've had have been with the diesel engines themselves or their emissions equipment. So, obviously it's about 3 times the cost for that match, but it's something that we may be able to get a longer service life out of than a used piece of equipment. But this is something that we are looking for some input from council on because the grant applications for that 80% grant are due coming up at the end of October. So if that's something that the council's interested in staff pursuing, then we can do that. Also point out that there may be additional other grant programs that we could get to cover to reduce that local match of $150,000 potentially.
I'm not a huge fan of spending 3 times as much as we need to for something that my concern with any of the heavy duty electric vehicles is they're not really proven yet. And so, yeah, we would hope that the cost and the runtime is, or the lessened maintenance and the runtime is accurate, but nothing comes without a price. So, whether it's having to build a new storage unit or wiring it, and I mean, it'd be one thing to be if it was a 100% grant funded where it didn't cost us anything, but I don't know, $100,000 for $100,000 more is a lot. I don't know. I'm not sold on the electric heavy duty vehicles yet. So.
Me either.
All right, well, we'll proceed with the 50,000 option then. Thank you. Next up, we have some additional equipment, replacement zero-turn mower to replace a 10-year-old one that's reached the end of its life that we're planning on surplusing next year. And then some additional or new snow and removal equipment. We're going to be replacing one of our sanders and installing a new plow and mount on one of our Dodge Public Works vehicles. Cost of those are $20,000 and $13,500 respectively. On to parks. We have first up here a floating kayak dock. So this is something that we have been exploring for down at Pollock Park, or potentially one of our other waterfront parks down at the East Fork. This would allow both disabled and regular able-bodied kayakers to better access the water. Right now, it's basically a narrow gravel path into the water that you have to traverse. And the goal would be to put this floating kayak dock out there to make it easier to get in and out of the water. Because of some of the restrictions that are down there in the floodplain, as Ethan was talking about earlier, and shorelines, this would be something that we couldn't make a permanent installation without quite a bit of permitting that would probably triple the cost of the project. So the concept is that we would have something that we could put out there, in the spring, pull it up about this time of year in the fall, and it's a temporary structure, so it eases the permitting burden.
I know the permitting can be very expensive. I had that experience looking at it, putting a boathouse down on the Columbia. You said it was eased, but have we looked deeper into what the permitting costs and requirements would be?
We have done some initial research on like a permanent structure, like if it was on pilings, like a traditional dock, and that was kind of what led us to consider something temporary. So, we don't have a final, read. This would basically cover the cost of the dock itself. And if there's some unknown permitting that would be triggered by a temporary structure, there's potential that we would have to go through that process. But by basically not having it be anchored in the water, we think it's going to make the project a lot more viable.
I think it would be great if it can be done.
The permanent one, or are you talking about the floating one?
The temporary one. I don't think we could do a permanent one, at least from what
Mhm.
I was trying to replace the boathouse for the sheriff's office, and it was going to be, I think we did spend almost $50,000 in river engineering fees and permitting fees. We got the permits, but then the bids came in higher than what we had money approved for, so we had to abandon the whole project. But the permits were in excess of 10,000, I think.
All right, I guess on to the next item here, unless there's any other comments on the kayak dock. All right, so next, some trail system work. The first of these is design and permitting of an expanded trail system in the center bottoms. This is something that we have been working with the county on, basically the trail system down below Sternwheeler Park. It's currently county lands. City staff have actually been maintaining those lands, so we're working with the county to potentially transfer those properties over to the city so that we are able to maintain them still for our citizens to use. And then also so that we have a little bit better control over maintaining and building out the trail system that goes through those areas, and some of the other features like the bird blinds. So the concept here is that the city would lead the effort to design a gravel or soft surface trail expansion that would be then constructed by volunteer groups. The city could provide the materials, and volunteer groups like the Eagle Scouts could provide the labor to extend these trails. Because it is in a floodplain, there is a design and permitting process that needs to be done, so we can't really skip that step, but we can design something that is able to be built by volunteers. The second piece of this trails project is some seal coating of some of our existing asphalt trails. Again, just like the streets, you got to maintain your asphalt, otherwise it degrades. So we'd be looking to put about $10,000 into seal coating some of our existing asphalt trails. On to stormwater, and this project has changed a little bit since the Budget Advisory Committee meeting. So as you all, council is aware, we had that sinkhole that opened up New Year's Eve of last year in the 36-inch corrugated metal pipe that extends under Fifth and the card room parking lots. We've made a repair to that section that collapsed, and we've done some TV inspection of the remaining line and found that it's nearing the end of its design life. So the challenge there is that it's 20 feet deep and it's pretty close to existing buildings, so it's not something you can just easily dig up and replace. So the concept is that we do a trenchless pipe lining system, which is basically where they roll a sock or some other sort of pre-impregnated soft material into, and then it hardens up. It's sort of like a pipe within a pipe after it hardens up. And after some discussion internally, we decided that it probably would be best to break this project into 2 phases, do design next year and then construction the following year.
Kind of like the magic that goes over ice cream, the magic chocolate.
Yeah.
Where it hardens over.
Yeah, same exact idea. And this is an example sort of what something looks like, what one of these corrugated metal pipes looks like before and after this. So we kind of decided that it might be better to complete design first because one, it's sort of a specialized project. And so it's a little bit hard to get a cost estimate, without having a design. And it's not something that's, gonna necessarily fail tomorrow, but it's something that we want to, to make sure we're being proactive on repairing.
Brian, can you explain to the council if we don't do this and where it's actually located?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, it cuts next to the police station. That's where we had the collapse there on the roadway, and then it extends. As best we can tell, it's about 4 or 5 feet off the corner of the new Phoenix building, and then it kind of cuts diagonally through the parking lot there. There's a manhole, and then it goes out into the roundabout, and then kind of turns the corner and outlets by the wastewater treatment plant there. There is what's known as a blind Y. It's where 2 pipes come together underground on this. So part of this project will involve locating where that's at, excavating it, and installing a manhole structure there. 1, so we can clean it in the future, and 2, because this trenchless pipe repair, you have to be able to access each end of your pipe runs. So anyway, hopefully that explains that. I'm happy to answer any questions that there might be on this
And
one.
then if we don't do it and it collapses and causes any damage, can you explain to council what happens then?
Yeah, I mean, Bronson can probably weigh in too, but I think there'd probably be some, potential liability or litigation, with the damage to property. So.
True.
Yeah.
Sounds like a good idea then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Brian, I got to give you a lot of credit on that because that was a great idea, great research on figuring it out, and you kept pushing forward with it.
Thank you. All right, on to community development. And the first one is community survey. And that's something that we've seen other jurisdictions in the area use. But it costs about $10,000 to have one of these done. And the data is generated. You basically hire a company that specializes in this sort of work. They do a randomized selection of residents, and you get a statistically significant data set that you can work from, compared to like a Survey Monkey or something like that, where it's not necessarily statistically significant. It's just whoever decided to respond, and maybe there's, you get a select group of people that are really passionate about an issue kind of skewing the results. Essentially what this survey would do would be to look at the community's satisfaction on several areas of government that the city services, that the city provides. They can then benchmark where we're at against other similar sized cities, both West Coast and throughout the nation. And then they can use that data to figure out where we can best utilize our limited resources, funds, staff time, et cetera, to improve satisfaction. There's some things that, people may not be happy about, but you could throw, a bunch of time and money at it and they still may not be happy about it. And there's others that, you can really make a positive change. So they would help us be able to identify and apply our resources most effectively. And then you can conduct these surveys, future surveys at a little bit lower cost once it's set up. Future ones don't cost necessarily $10,000. But you can then track your progress and see, see if we're making a difference or see if there's new priorities that the community has. I'll pause there and see if there's any questions or additional input on that one, because that was something that that the Budget Advisory Committee was really kind of on the fence about, or really wanted to have some more information on.
Have you reviewed studies that were done in other cities to see what it is that they ask and then how it's presented in a report at the end of it?
Yeah, so I was involved in 3 of these at my time at City of Ridgefield, the initial one, and then 2 subsequent follow-up ones. They did them every 3 years or so. And I could probably pirate a copy or dig up a copy of the presentation that they did. But basically there's most of them are standardized questions which allows you then to benchmark yourself against other jurisdictions. But then there's also a possibility of adding in some city specific questions if there's something that the council really wants some feedback from the community on. And those obviously you can't benchmark because they're sort of custom for the city, but the benchmarked ones you can really, like I said, get a sense of how we're stacking up on everything from police service to sewer service and billing, customer service, all those sort of items. What became apparent out of the Ridgefield studies that I was involved in was that the community really wanted to see a heavy investment in trails and sidewalks. There was a pretty high dissatisfaction there. And so, we made some investments there and we could actually see that progress in subsequent surveys.
How do they determine, I guess, what percentage of the population gets asked these questions? I understand that it's random, but if it's 10 people that respond, or is it 100 people that respond? How do they report that?
Yeah, so I'm not a statistician, although I stayed at the Holiday Inn and took a class one time. But basically they look at the overall population of the city. They kind of know in general, what sort of response rate they get. And so they'll send out enough to be able to get a statistically significant response. So, they'll say, okay, we have a population of 4,500. We need, 450, say, responses. I think it's usually a little bit less than that, but we'll just use round numbers here. But they know that only, on average, 50% of people respond. So we'll send it to 900 people, sort of thing.
Okay.
Keep it or mix it? Do you guys want to keep it?
I'm trying to decide.
I don't need an answer now.
Yeah, we can think about it.
I think it could be really valuable. I know we've talked about setting surveys out on a number of different projects, and it might be a better way to get some more input, but
I'll get a copy of the presentation, the sort of the results that Ridgefield got from one of theirs, and I can send that around so you can kind of see what data that you're getting out of that.
Yeah, I mean, we get Al's opinion for free, so
that's true. That's true.
I don't know. There's $10,000. I would be concerned that we're not getting $10,000 worth of information back. But it's just my thought.
Sure. Last up on the new projects or continued projects is the downtown and Timmins Landing. This is really a carryover, a completion of what was presented last year. So we have Ethan and the WSP team working on our planned action areas for the downtown and Timmins Landing areas. It's a 2-year project, so this is the second portion of that work that they are doing for us. And I totally stole my slide from last year on it. And then the very last slide here are carry forward projects from last year. So there's a sort of a amusing typo. The first one, I didn't change that from 2022, and it's probably more like 2018 that we've been carrying over this junction sign. But we actually have a plan now, I think, that we're working on. So we'd like to carry that forward so that we can complete that project. Looks like we'll be well within that budget with the concept that we're currently exploring. We have the 4th Street and Breezy Creek design and right-of-way project. We had 110,000 budgeted this year. I think we actually had this is all grant funds from the Department of Commerce grant, and I think we actually had more than that. So we're just planning on carrying over that same 110. That's about how much we have left in the grant. And then on the right-of-way side, we had budgeted $505,000 this year. It's taken longer than we anticipated to get WashDOT's right-of-way certification. I think we have our 3rd round of right-of-way plans into them. And I think we've addressed all their comments at this point. So we're hoping that they give us the thumbs up to actually start going and buying property here. But in talking to our right-of-way folks, it's likely that, by the time we go through the appraisal process and all that, that it'll bleed into next year. So proposing to carry over $485,000 of those funds to next year. Pedestrian path on Pacific Highway. We had $200,000. We're proposing to carry that whole amount forward. Is that right? I may have to check that number because we are working on that right now. One of my numbers is wrong. So I'll revise that and get back to you. And then finally, the horizontal curb and roadway departure project. This is something that I think that's a $17,000 match. So we have an $880,000 grant for. Again, we had to go out for consultant selection a couple times. We didn't get any responses the first time. The second time we got 2 responses, which was less than the 3 that WashDOT required. So we had to go through a sole sourcing requirement. It's just taken a lot longer to get them on board and going. So we're anticipating that they'll get started this year, but have to wrap up their design work next year so that we can, and then we'll bid that work as well. Most of this is the construction portion of that. I think the contract that we currently are working on, well, it'll be here later in my engineering report. So we'll talk about that then, I guess. So with that, again, happy to answer any questions that the council may have, get feedback on any projects that we may want to remove, or any other projects that we might want to consider that I can look at adding to the capital budget.
I think it was in February. I don't remember when it was exactly, but it was this year. Councilmember Cerveny and I went to Olympia, and just prior to that, the Congresswoman came here to look at the 4th Street Breezy Creek. Did we get any traction from either the state or the federal level on
So
the remainder of that
we
project?
have about, I want to say about $4 million of construction funds of the 16 million committed. We had applied for that national culvert elimination grant because we are removing multiple fish barriers on this project. Took quite a while to hear back from that, but it looked like we didn't receive those funds. So, later this evening, we're going to be talking with CFM, a federal lobbyist, and if we proceed with that contract, I think that's something they can help us potentially be more successful in the future on some of these federal grants on.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, they actually helped Ridgefield get the $8.5 million grant for the road project over there in front of 7-Eleven. So that's the group that's being presented tonight. And in a few weeks, we'll be having a presentation on a group that does professional grant writing with a 72% success rate.
So I wanted to let you know what the budget schedule looks like. September 26th is our last budget advisory committee meeting, where they will see our final-ish budget. And then October 11th, there will be a budget presentation here to council, and we'll have our first public hearing. And then October 25th, we will do our revenue and tax levy budget presentation and public hearing and approval for that. And then on November 15th, we will do our actual final budget presentation and approval for that.
All right. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Brian. And thank you, Ethan. Any further questions? Nothing else? All right. I'd like to call tonight's work session closed. Thank you. And we will see you in 25 minutes for the city council meeting.
This conference will now be recorded.
All right. Thank you. Good evening. Today is Wednesday, September 13th, 2023, and I'd like to call today's city council meeting to order. Can we all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Clerk, may I have a roll call?
Councilmember Fox,
Absent, excused.
Councilmember Kasberg,
I'm here.
Councilmember Boyle,
Absent and excused.
Councilmember Leija,
Present.
Councilmember Cerveny,
Present.
Mayor Strobin.
Here. Thank you, clerk. Next up, public comment. Clerk, please call up public comments from the audience.
Alfilla,
Alfella, 152 West 15th Street. I was reading a reflector the other day, and there's a comment under there about the taxes in the city of La Center. And there was some, they didn't give the person's name, said, well, we ought to raise the taxes on the card rooms. And, you know, maybe at one time that would be a pretty good idea, but not in today's world. You know, you look out here and you see sidewalks and streets. I've lived here all my life, so I know. I've lived here all my life, so, you know, back in the day, they didn't have sidewalks going out to the school. And what you see out there is directly attributed to the money from the card rooms. And, you know, we've lost one card room. We lost one and it came back. And every month, Maria gets up and she says, this is how much money, blah, blah, blah. You know, pay attention, you know, because they're taxed on their gross. There's no other business in town that's taxed on their gross. You know, so just be aware, you know, you got these people who are uninformed. Yeah, well, you know, nobody wants to pay more taxes. I definitely don't, and I'll try and get out of it. But I'm afraid that we start taxing the card rooms more, they'll just say, bye, we'll go someplace else. Because they're in business to do one thing, and that's make money. As most businesses are. So you start hearing comments like that, it scares me. So just be aware, do your due diligence. You know, find out exactly how that money is spent and everything else. You know, at one time it was over 50%. Now it's under 50% of our budget. When it was originally put in, the city council says, no, we're not going to spend any of this money that we get from the card rooms on running the city of La Center. You know, it made me so angry. I boycotted them for 30 years. I never went in those places because they gamble in there. They drink. Oh my gosh. You know, but about 5 years ago, I woke up to the fact that, you know, you look around, you see what good they've done. And so every Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock, you'll see me sitting down there ordering breakfast. May not order much, but okay. Well, so much. I gave you my opinion. You happy, Casey?
I'm very happy. Thank you.
God bless America.
Thank you, Al.
Dennis Hill,
Skip made a comment to me. He said, we should probably come up with a theme song, bringing Al up to the mic. And so that could be a citywide project. Dennis Hill, 1316 West Alder Place. Back in 9/1, I wrote a letter to the council and the mayor regarding the activity going on at the junction related to the Cowlitz tribe. I want to read, I'm not going to read the letter to you, but I got some excerpts that I want to read out of it, if I could, please. During 2016, Mayor Thornton and Cowlitz Chairman IL had many meetings to work on very important IGA, which is intergovernmental agreement between the Cowlitz tribe and La Center. This IG covered a wide range of topics, but one stands out above the rest and is directly addresses land within the La Center east of the I-5. We call that the junction. Chairman IL wrote into the IGA the following agreement and mutual promises that both parties agreed to and executed on March 3rd, 2016. And I want to quote, property owned or subsequently acquired by the tribe east of I-5 is the subject. The tribe will not seek trust or reservation status for land it acquires east of the interstate, that is south of Paradise Park and north of Northwest 299th Street, for any business enterprise owned or operated by the tribe on land east of the Interstate 5 and within the corporate limits of the city. In developing a coordination area plan for La Center Junction area, they believe that they support the Growth Management Act and want to implement our city's urban area comprehensive plan and encourage compatible development. If that land goes into trust, some of the things that we need to consider is there's about 9 line items on our property tax bill. For example, city schools, city centers, La Center city schools get 39% of our revenue from our property taxes. The city gets about 9.4%, and that's only 2 of the 9 that are on our tax bill. I believe that the city council should now be reaching out to the La Center citizens about the proposed IGA before it gets too far along. A wrong move on the part of the city council could have long-term disastrous effect on La Center's future revenue. Please be extremely careful in making your final determinations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.
Melissa Flatt.
Hello, Melissa Flatt, 660 East 18th Street. I'm here for La Center United tonight. And a couple things, just announcements. We have our yearly orientation, so we're entering year 9. So we have 2 years left on our grant. So we're going to do an orientation in emergency preparedness. There was a resident, Therese Lavala, I believe, who posted on Nextdoor that after the fire, she wanted to host what should you have grabbed, what should you have done type of thing. And she can only allow 5 people to come. So I reached out. She's going to do that after our orientation. So that will take place next Monday, the 18th. We're going to do a 3 o'clock orientation at the elementary school. And then at the community center, 5:30 to 7 will be the orientation and the emergency preparedness. The second thing is on October 21st, we have secured doing another youth mental health first aid training. Cost is completely free. We normally have had to pay for either the entire event or the manuals. This year it's all free, so we'll be looking for funding for just the lunch, and we can have up to 30 participants. If we have a higher need, we'll do another one, and we may do an hour and a half. It's called QPR training, and that's what the schools use. It's question, persuade, response. And so that way families and neighbors and coaches can all use the same language and know how they connect at school with that. I wanted to talk real quick about the ice cream social. We missed the last meeting because of that. We had a really good turnout, a lot of new families. I think we served about 200 dishes of ice cream and made quite a few connections. And the last thing we have, we're still working on it. I've got somebody secured to decorate for us so far, but we're doing Breakfast with Santa on November 18th. And as of right now, we don't have pricing. I believe it's going to be free, just a community event. They'll probably have to pre-register, So that way we don't have everybody show up at 8 o'clock in the morning, maybe so many families at a time. And last, we have a community survey. I have put some flyers in the back. I've posted them. It's 18 years and older. So Health U survey is done by the youth in our community, grades 6 through 12, every other year. This is the adult survey. So you don't have to have children. You just have to be 18 years and older. And if you grab this, it'll show you how to submit to win a $20 gift card for just completing that. So that's it.
Thank you, Melissa.
Yuri?
Hello, everyone. Name's Yuri. I live on 200 West 10th Street, just up the road. Hello, neighbors. I am here because I spoke to Alex yesterday. I brought up my concerns to him. I was kind of frustrated. I'm here about the speeders and the heavy traffic. I'm talking about 40, 50 miles an hour cars, trucks, dump trucks at sometimes along to West 10th Street, right past my house. I have 3 daughters. I have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 4-month-old. My older 2 ride bikes. They love to ride bikes, but they can't because of the crazy cars, the speeding that happens along that street. We have pedestrians, many pedestrians walking their dogs, just going out for walks, runs along that street. Within like 100 square feet of my house, the neighbors across the street from me have a young child, and their next door neighbors have another young child. So they're just within 100 square feet. There's like 4 young children that like to ride their bikes. I've spoken to the police department when we still had one. They told me that they will, increase patrols. Unfortunately, we don't have one right now. I most recently spoke to the Washougal officer that sometimes patrols our area. I only saw him like once or twice, kind of staking out our street. So I hope that the council, the city, can do something about that. My short-term solution is to put one of those, and I think, sir, you already emailed Alex, and I appreciate you for that, about putting the speed limit monitor on our street to at least deter some of the speeders. Long-term is my solution. Long-term is obviously, hopefully we can get a police department in town so they can start pulling these guys over, and possibly just have like a permanent speed limit monitor, or like a banner or something that says, drive like your kids live here, or something like that. So I just want to bring this issue to your attention. Just yesterday, I went inside my house for a second. I was working outside. I look out the window. My daughter is on the ground with her bike next to her in a car beside her on the street. I don't know what happened. By the time I ran out, the car was already gone. But I don't know all I knew was that my daughter was on the ground, the bike was next to her, and the car was, thankfully she was fine. She wasn't hurt, but I don't want to imagine what could have been. So I did write you guys an email about this because I didn't think I was going to come, but I made it. So that's my concern, and I hope you guys can address that. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuri. Normally we don't address comments from the audience, but please know, Yuri, that we do take the situation serious, and the city is working, the attorneys are working diligently to ensure the safety of the residents of the town. We hope to have the police situation rectified here soon. Thank you. No other comments in person?
No other person comments.
Thank you. If there are any public comments from those calling in, please press *6 to unmute yourselves. State your name and address for the record.
Yes, hi. Good evening. This is Kimberly Goheen-Elbin, live citizen of Clark County, Washington, and 30-year live here where my mother was born. So the GMA, the Growth Management Act, I'm finding that the United Nations cities and those democratic cities that want to follow this UN agenda have the Growth Management Act, whereas a lot, in fact, most counties in Washington state do not have the Growth Management Act. Why? because the Growth Management Act is not only allowing the illegal immigrants in and we're going to house them, it's pretty lengthy, but citizens need to wake up to this. But it is using our hard-earned tax dollars to build. And I want growth to stop in Clark County, Washington, USA. I mean, it's got to stop. We've had 30 years of it, and they are taking away our heritage of a country setting. And I have quite a bit to say about Alien A and the police department, but I'm not going to today. I do want I want citizens to get a pen and paper and notice that write down the Columbian blog directory. And on September 2nd, one of the Columbian publishers put out an article about Clark County going to stop people that are abusive to their council and unelected managers. So that was me. It's written about me. I felt, and I wrote right after that meeting that they targeted me. So you need to listen to that. It's the Clark County Council meeting of August 16th. It's council time, and there's going to be 7 people that speak that are very interesting people to listen to. Clark County is trying to speak up and wake up. After the second speaker, who is Glenn Kincaid, the unelected county manager piped up and said, we cannot make sure that people are talking about the agenda only. Mr. Medvedji was chairing that day and said, well, I kind of gave him a little bit of leanways because I know how far he drove away. He said it was very refreshing not to hear about the United Nations domain plan that we have. He said under his breath, plan that we have. And I want people to listen to this. This is your county manager or your county council speaking, that we are in a plan. We are going to lose our freedom, and people need to stand up to this. And I mean it, we really do. So these are examples of how our local Clark County government is doing to act towards patriot citizens. And so that's what they're doing to me. And if you'll also write down October 24th of 2022, the Vancouver City Council meeting, and go to the last 10 minutes of that, and that's how they treated me. I had a lawsuit, and now I believe, in my opinion, they bought my attorney off, and he also is well known. I won't go into that either. But you need to.
Thank you, Clerk. Any other public comments from those calling in, please press *6 to unmute yourself, state your name and your address. Hearing none, are there any public comments to be read?
None to be read.
Thank you, Clerk. Tonight we do have some presentations. First presentation on the agenda is the CFM presentation. Please welcome Joel Rubin to present CFM. Is Joel online? Is it virtual? Okay, perfect.
Let's see if I get this. Can you all hear me okay?
There we go. Yes.
All right, and it looks like the presentation is on your screen as well?
Yes, it is.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. Joel Rubin with CFM Advocates. Really appreciate the opportunity to present to Mayor and Council tonight. I wish I was there in person. I'm stuck here in Washington, D.C., but I will be out there in early October, so hopefully I'll get to see some of you all in person. Really appreciate this opportunity to present and talk a little bit about CFM Advocates, and would be really honored to represent the city of La Center in your nation's capital tonight. So can I move on to the next slide, please? Tonight, I'll be talking briefly about our firm's history, our team, how we operate, and some of our successes. We've been in discussion with the mayor and some city staff about the services that we provide, and we're hoping we can bring some of the successes that we brought to communities across Oregon and Washington to La Center. And so this is going to talk a little bit about who we are and the successes that we've had. Next slide, please. So first, I wanted to provide a little information about who we are. CFM is a Pacific Northwest-based firm. We have offices in Vancouver, Washington, in Portland, in Salem, and I'm based here in Washington, D.C. We've been around since 1990, so we've been active in federal lobbying for 3 decades. And we really focus on municipal governments. We represent 19 local governments in Oregon and Washington. We also do represent other agencies like transit systems and water districts, ports, and a national bus coalition. And so we have a broad range of experience in working with your federal officials and federal agencies, both in DC and back in Southwest Washington. Next slide, please. We have over 80 years of federal experience. We have 8 federal lobbyists on our team, federal advocates. We have a bipartisan group. I used to work for Congressman Brian Baird, who was the congressman from Southwest Washington. I was his legislative director many moons ago from 2000. I worked for him from 2000 to 2005. We also have former Senator Murray staffers from Southwest Washington, Paige Strickler and David Hodges, who are both based in Vancouver, Washington. So they would be your eyes and ears on the ground out there. Both Paige and David were Senator Murray's Southwest Washington directors and are very familiar with the issues of Southwest Washington and all of the federal issues that come up on a regular basis in your community. We have a bipartisan team. We also have Cam Brandt from our federal team that will be part of the La Center team if we're lucky enough to work with you. Cam was a staff assistant for Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler, and a Republican. And we also have Kirby Garrett, who worked for Congressman Greg Walden, who's a Republican as well. So we have a bipartisan team that really focuses on municipal projects and getting your projects awarded, and also legislative successes as well. We have a really strong record of success. Mostly municipal governments want funding and resources and grant awards and congressionally directed spending to come back to the community. You know, your taxpayers are spending or paying a lot in taxes, and every community, regardless of size, should get back their fair share. And that's a lot of what we try to do on a daily basis, is really represent a lot of the mid-sized and smaller cities that have a difficult time navigating the federal bureaucracy, which can be extremely challenging and cumbersome. And really, a lot of times the federal government sets up parameters where you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and it's just really difficult. And what we try to do is navigate through those circumstances to help you all be successful. Next slide, please. The scope of services that we provide, like I said, municipal governments are mostly focused on funding, so grants and appropriations. They're called congressionally directed spending requests or earmarks. On the grant side, this is a really good time to be engaging at the federal level. Before the passage of the infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, there were probably around 30 to 50 programs that La Center would be interested in going after grant funding for. After both of those big multi-year bills passed in 2021, there are dozens more programs for communities like La Center to take advantage of. And so we're very familiar with all those funding streams and try to make sure that you all are aware of them and help you go after them. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a future slide, but knowing the grant process is extremely important. And one of the things that really separates us from most other advocacy firms is we help our communities write grants. Writing a grant proposal is an art form, and it takes a lot of work, time, and effort, and we try to alleviate the burden on our clients and take that on as much as possible onto our plates and put together really good competitive grant applications to put you in the best possible position for success. But in addition to grants, there's the appropriations process. They're called now congressionally directed spending, what they're previously called earmarks. Earmarks were gone for 10 years. They were eliminated back in 2010, and they were brought back 3 years ago. There's been 2 rounds of awards through the appropriations process. And so we're very familiar with the accounts, the eligibility, the local match requirements, all the rules and regulations that are tied with earmarks. It's not nearly as cumbersome as the grant process, but there is still a lot of rules and regulations around it. And so we're very familiar with all of those issues. And we've been very successful at securing appropriations CDS requests for our clients. In addition to that, we've passed legislation on behalf of our clients. Recent success for Skamania County was securing legislation to do a federal land transfer to put federal land into the county's storage so they can do some economic development in their county. And that's a huge issue for Skamania County, as most of their land is either federally or state owned. So there's not much economic development opportunity there. So work on legislative priorities for our clients as well. We coordinate with your team, obviously, and also on the state and federal level, not just with agencies and members of Congress, but also with national associations like the National League of Cities, Conference of Mayors, National Association of Counties, and other larger associations where aligning with them can help your interests as well. In relationship building, it's not just knowing your congressional delegation, which we do, and we know you have relationships with them as well. We help build those relationships with your congressional delegation, but it's also knowing the federal agency staff, it's knowing the leaders within the federal agencies, and knowing the committee staff, depending on what appropriations you're going after or other legislation that you're looking to move in Washington, D.C. We're very familiar with all the major committee staffers, agencies, and obviously the Washington and Oregon congressional delegation. And then strategic communications and positioning our clients' projects for success. We really try to help you all and our clients tell a good story to match what the federal priorities are. Certain administrations have different priorities. Certain agencies have different priorities. We're aware of those, and we try to make sure that your projects are highlighting some of the different benefits that fit into those federal priorities. In addition, we understand certain members of Congress have certain projects and issues that they like to work on, and we try to align those with our clients' interests as well. Next slide, please. And this is the last slide here. So we're just really proud of the success that we've had for our federal clients over the last, a lot of this comes down to, return on investment for many of our clients. Going out and hiring an advocate in Washington, D.C. Isn't the first thing to come to mind for many communities. But what really makes a lot of sense is when we do start working together, we start bringing back those federal resources and see those projects move forward, see your communities get safer, get more economic development, get transportation projects, water infrastructure projects to help you all meet a lot of the challenges that you have as a community. So we've been really proud of secured $145 million for our clients in the last 3 years. This is a 62-to-1 return on investment for our clients, which is pretty, very proud of that. One testament that shows how some of our success is we're the only firm in the entire country to have secured 6 what they call build or raise grants in 6 consecutive rounds. These are like winning the lottery. Washington State typically got 2 to 3 grants per year. Now they get about 4 or 5 because the infrastructure package provided some additional funding there. But it was like winning the lottery, getting these raise build grants, and we were able to get it 6 years in a row. And these are grants that we actually wrote, that we lobbied for, and that we were able to secure at the end of the day. We got 2 in Washington State, at the Port of Longview and City of Ridgefield, and we got 4 in Oregon over that 6-year period. We also have 100% success rate with congressionally directed spending for earmarks. If our clients have been with us 2 years, every single one of our clients has received at least 1 earmark, and many have received multiple earmarks. Really proud of that. And then lastly, Bloomberg Government does a review of lobbying activities every year. And for 4 years in a row, CFM was one of only a dozen firms nationwide that was able to retain 100% of their clients over a 3-year period. For those 4 years that we were on that list, there was really 1 or 2 other firms in the entire country. There's 10,000 plus lobbying firms nationwide. We were one of only a handful of lobbying firms that made that list, and just something we're really proud of. It's not just about being successful and making sure that our clients are happy. It's really about that long-term relationship. And we're just really proud that we've been able to develop those strong relationships with our clients, and we're look to keep that record going. But with that, I wanted to turn it over to the mayor and council and see if there were any questions. Happy to answer those, and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you for the presentation, Joel. Is there any questions for Joel? Joel, thank you. Apparently there's no questions. Great presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Mayor and Council. Appreciate it. And hopefully we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have the Center School District updates. Please welcome students Billy Ross and Sophia Johnson, who will be presenting on La Center Schools.
Thank you, Mayor Strobin and City Council. Peter Rosencrantz, Superintendent of the Center School District. Long ago, I promised that I wanted to bring kids in to share the experience. I stand up here and talk about our experiences all the time, and it gives me, or I have it's my honor to be able to introduce our ASB President, Sophia Johnson. And say hi. And our ASB Historian and Communications Officer, Billy Ross.
Thank you. Welcome.
So I'm Sophia Johnson, as Mr. Rosencrantz said. I'm a senior at La Center High School, and Billy Ross is a junior. Today we're going to talk to you about how our school year has gone so far. We'll talk about sports, the activities going on in the classroom and how classes are going, some upcoming events, and our new program that we just did this year called Breaking Down the Walls. Here's Billy.
Thank you, everyone, and good evening. My name is Billy Ross. I'm the Center Activities Coordinator and Historian. The beginning of this school year has gone very well. We started off with an assembly with Mr. Johnson and Mr. Cook giving everyone a warm welcome. With more classes to choose from, including a wide variety of new AP courses, many students, as myself, are very pleased with these new classes. The two new counselors, Mrs. Johnson and Mrs. Bronson, have done a very well job of placing people in classes that they wanted. This year, we also opened up the option to freshmen to take AP courses, which a lot of them have taken. And I think this is amazing. With a large incoming freshman class, there are much bigger class sizes. This will take time for students and teachers to adjust to this. For sports and events, football and volleyball have gone undefeated in their season so far. Girls swim, boys golf, cross country, and girls soccer are also doing amazing. There has been a good turnout of students to support these sports, even at away matches. It is awesome to see the students going out and supporting one another. And I know that in La Center, everyone looks forward to a good home game. Our school just finished up today with an activity called Breaking Down the Walls. It was a full day workshop, and we went through a series of icebreakers, team building questions and activities, and also one-on-one conversations with students that we may not have ever spoken to before this. I would say it went very well, with kids stepping out of their comfort zones. Everyone learned something new about someone. September 25th is the first day of homecoming week, which we are all very excited for. This year's theme is Disney, A Night of Magic. The dance will be on Saturday, September 30th. Girls Powder Puff is Wednesday of that week, with a number of other activities leading up to the dance. This includes class wars, lunchtime activities, dress-up days, and more. It is a school-wide competition that we are all always excited for. A huge thanks to Mr. Rosencrantz for letting me and Sophia talk. Go Wildcats, and I'll give it back to Mr. Rosencrantz.
So thank you so much. I just have one question for you. Who's going to win the homecoming, juniors or seniors?
Juniors.
Go. I just want to reiterate some of the things that Billy had said regarding just some of the successes. We have 70 more students. You hear about sinking enrollment of schools across our nation, choosing homeschool or private school options, which as a superintendent, if a family chooses those options, I fully support it. It's a family decision. But we are up 70 students. That's huge in this time. We also have, as Billy also talked about, last year we had 3 AP courses. Typically they run 8 to maybe 10 kids if we're lucky. This year we have 6 courses and they're all running 20, 25 kids. There are significantly more students attending those. And then on top of that, we have 84 students entering a new construction program for building construction skills, tiny homes, sheds, and the like, which you've heard me speak about as well. There's just amazing things happening. Last night, the principals presented on the strategic improvement plans for each building. Significant level of coherence between buildings as we work to improve students each and every year as they go through the program. There's 2 things that are mantras for this year. One is that any problem or challenge we face, we will teach or learn our way through. We're a teaching institution. We teach and we learn. And as a system, that's what we use to also approach any problem we'll face. And the second piece, the importance of these meetings for me, is as a city, you work with the parents and you work with the community and the parents. And as a school district, we work with their kids. And together, when we collaborate, we build really strong families. And to me, that's the cornerstone of any community. And so it's really an honor to bring 2 of our ASB officers up to speak with you, and I hope they are willing to do more later. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much. Future leaders. All right. Yeah, future council members, yeah. All right, this will be, next up is the first look at the LDR and the MDR. Mr. Alec, and I'm butchered your name last time, I apologize. Igorola?
Close, Egorola.
Egorola,
Yes.
Egorola. With WSP will be presenting.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Mayor, council members. Again, I'm Alec Egorola. I'm a planner, land use planner with WSP. I've been working closely with Ethan Spoo the past year or so, doing planning for the center. I've been working a lot in the background and closely with the Planning Commission on a lot of code updates and other planning activities with the center. So again, I'll be presenting the first look at the LDR 7.5 front setbacks update. Will be the first thing I discuss tonight, and then I'll follow that up with the MDR 16 density code update. So if we could jump to page 97 of the packet, there's a series of photos. As I go through the first bit of my presentation, just want to show these photos to kind of frame before we go into the code updates. So you can slide through these as I speak. So the purpose of the LDR 7.5 or the low density residential zone front setbacks code update is to allow developers and builders the opportunity to provide greater variety of architectural designs and more interesting streetscapes. This would be done by reducing the front yard setback in exchange for providing a higher level of architectural detail on the fronts of homes. The current front yard setback is 20 feet from the property line or the right-of-way in the center in the LDR zone. And this limits housing floor plan options for developers and property owners and may limit a developer's ability to provide a variety of designs and more interesting streetscapes and creating more of a livable community design. The current requirement also limits the ability of the community to achieve the intent of the LDR 7.5 district, which in quotes is encourage traditional pedestrian-oriented neighborhoods, which is directly from the LDR 7.5 zone chapter. So again, having this reduced front yard setback that we are proposing can create walkable and attractive neighborhoods and reduce the dominance of front-loading garages along a street. If you could go to the next slide, these are just a series of photos of communities here in Vancouver, and then the last 2 are here in the center. So if we keep going through these photos, these are examples of homes where their front living areas are situated closer than 20 feet to the streets. There's examples with homes with garages, front-loading garages, and without. Again, this one's in Vancouver. Next photo, please. Again, these are just more homes as well in Vancouver with that reduced front yard setback, and additionally some architectural details they're providing that elevate the design as they are situated closer to the street. Next photo, please. Again, this one's in Vancouver as well. And then I believe the last two that we're coming up to, next photo, please. This one's in the center. This home obviously doesn't have a front loading garage. I'm just prefacing kind of what our code updates will be to like shape what we're seeing here. This home has a side loading garage, but as you can see, it's situated closer to the street, less than 20 feet. And just kind of creating that more communal neighborhood feel as these homes are situated closer to the right of way and creating a walkable community. And so framing these example homes, we've been using that to shape our draft redline code and have fleshed this out with the Planning Commission. So the changes we're proposing, if you go to page 93 of the packet, sorry to make you jump around. So page 93, this is table 18-130-080. And I believe if you scroll down, there's a table. There we go. It was on the wrong page. Yeah, page 94, sorry. This table here, we are proposing to add, as part of the requirements, a minimum front loading garage to be 20 feet to ensure that there's enough space. As I discussed further, our front living setback will actually reduce down to 12 feet with some provisions that we'll be requiring. But no matter what, the front loading garage has to be 20 feet just to have enough space for a vehicle to fit from the garage door to the sidewalk, and so that we're not blocking the sidewalk with vehicles, even though the front living area could be reduced. And then we are also adjusting the minimum rear yard setback. This would be 15 feet for the garage wall, but will remain 20 to living area. And that just allows flexibility. If you're pushing your garage 20 feet or more, there's more flexibility in the back of your lot to move that garage. And then next is adding that allowance for front yard setback reduction when in compliance with the listed requirements of a two-tiered approach. So the first tier is a front yard setback of no less than 15 feet. So the first tier, you can go from 20 down to 15. And the requirements to meet if you want to go down to 15 feet, you have to set back your front loading garage at least 5 feet from the front living area. So say you have your 15-foot front living area, your garage has to be 20 feet. Or if your front living area is at 17, your front loading garage has to be at 22 feet. So there has to be a 5-foot difference there, just to reduce that prominence of the front loading garage and to incentivize to create that neighborhood walkable feel. And then the garage also has to account for up to a maximum of 50% of the facade of the home. So no more than half of the width of your home facing the street can not be a garage. So you can't have a garage space that's 60% of the front of your home. Has to be 50% or less. And then again, no matter what, your front loading garage has to be 20 feet from the property line. So we're just really trying to design around creating that walkable sense of the home and making the living area close to the street, but also keeping the garage set back and reducing that prominence of the garage. So that's the purpose of that. And then in addition to that, we have a list of 5 priority architectural features to apply to the front of the home if you're reducing your setback down to 15 feet. If you go to page 95, we have added a list of different architectural or design treatments that you can apply to your home. I believe there's 7 or 8 of them. We're requiring them to comply with 5 of these, and these include shutters or louvers, dormers, knee or eave braces, pillars, different elements such as that to incentivize elevating the design a bit while your bringing the front of the home closer to the street. Are there any questions?
In a couple of those pictures that you had back there, there was some grass in between the sidewalk and the curb. Is that the homeowner's responsibility to mow that?
Yes, that would be the homeowner's responsibility. That's on their property. So if you have a 20-foot front yard setback, you'll have 20 feet of grass potentially, but now you can reduce that to 15 or even 12 feet, which I haven't gotten to the 12 feet yet. And so you'd have 15 feet of lawn or grass or 12 at this point. And that still is on the responsibility of the homeowner, which many of these fall under an HOA.
I'll just tag on to that too. So that area between the sidewalk and the curb is known as a planter strip. We allow the option to either have that planter strip be between the curb and the sidewalk or behind the sidewalk, but that 5-foot planter strip and the sidewalk, basically those two items together make up where that property line is. So this setback would be in addition to that. And basically from their end, the homeowner has to maintain it, but it's part of the city right of way.
Are those sidewalks narrower than a standard sidewalk?
No, so this wouldn't necessarily change any of our streetscape standards. So you'd still have that planter strip, you'd still have that same width of sidewalk that you would. It just from that, the property line essentially that's either at the back of the sidewalk or back of the planter strip, depending on which side of it's on, you would be setting back a lesser amount potentially from that point.
Okay. One more question about the sidewalks. In the pictures of the homes that are here in the center, are those sidewalks wider than a standard sidewalk, or was it kind of an illusion that I saw?
I think looking at that particular house with the stonework in front of it, I think that's a standard 5-foot sidewalk. I don't think it's a wider than usual one, but we can confirm that.
Okay.
Brian, can you explain to the council where this is coming from?
Sure. So this code amendment was actually sort of spurned on by some comments we received from New Tradition Homes, who is developing the Stevens Hillside project up off of Aspen. And they are trying to offer us some single level housing type products for, to allow people to age in place or people that don't want to necessarily go up and down stairs. They also have some stepped topography, just steep topography on that site, similar to many of our other sites around here. So they approached the city actually about a variance to at first to reduce this front yard setback, but we just after some conversations with Bronson and amongst staff decided that it would be more appropriate. We didn't really meet the variance criteria, but we then sort of morphed that concept into this code change. So again, I don't want to shortchange Alec, but really the simple version of this is, you make a nicer looking home or a nicer front facade, and then you can reduce that front setback. But the key also to this is that the garage can't get any closer than it already can in the existing code.
One other question that's kind of broader than this particular issue, I think. What does code say about curbing? Some neighborhoods have that rolled curb, which invites all kinds of problems, I think. But is that a specific code, or is it up to the builder to decide what type of curbing they're going to put in?
So that lives in our engineering standards, and the standard curb is they call it straight curb, the more straight up and down curb. But we do allow an option of that rolled curb in instances like cul-de-sacs, or in maybe, like townhome developments or projects where you have, a lot of driveways. So you're going to have, a lot of ups and downs for the driveway drops.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I was just wanting to make sure I had some questions answered. I thought I saw some questions on faces, so I'll proceed with my presentation. So the first tier, again, is to go from 20 feet to 15 feet. You have to add those treatments to your garage and also to the front-facing part of your home, the front facade. And then the second tier is from 15 to 12 feet. And as Brian was hinting, you have to apply all those features from the first tier And then in addition, you have to add an additional 4 facade treatments that are generally more difficult or more elevated in design, like a front covered porch, 3 or 4 different like textures on your home on like 30% of the facade, and so forth. And so the idea is, like what Brian was saying, the closer you bring your home to the street, the more elevated and intensive the design treatment would be. And then again, moving on from that, we did have established a review process for this. So we have a track A and a track B for the review. Track A is for site plan and subdivision review. So they come in and say, we want to reduce our front yard setback. So they have to provide a checklist, elevations of the homes that they're proposing to bring closer to the street, and then a site plan of all the homes that they're proposing to do this. And they'll go through the type 3 review process, will be approved by the planning or the hearing examiner. And then track B is just an individual lot. Prior to building permit, they'll just have to submit elevations in the checklist just to show how they're complying with those reduced front yard setback requirements. And then if they're in compliance, you can go ahead and proceed to build. And then one last item on that is for corner lots. If a corner lot is proposing to reduce their front yard setback, those front facade treatments that they're proposing, it can't just be placed on one side of the street. It has to wrap around on all street facing facades, just for consistency, as like if you're walking around the home, has these nice elevated treatments, and then you go around the next corner and it's gone. So we're just bringing that around for consistency of design. And then last night we had a planning commission hearing on this item. So the planning commission does not recommend approval of this item. And this will move forward to planning a hearing with you, the City Council, on September 27th. But per the conversation last night at the planning commission, they didn't recommend approval, as the main reason is reducing the setbacks will reduce spacing between the dwelling units, and they just didn't envision in the LDR zone having homes closer together necessarily. So that was the basis of that recommendation.
And for further note, Alec, I did attend the meeting last night. The vote went 2 to 1 with one abstaining because they didn't want to deal with a tiebreaker, which was stated on public record.
Thank you for the clarification.
So just so the council knows.
Thank you, Mayor.
And I guess just to tag on to that, we're planning on, if the council directs us to bring this back to a public hearing and then possible council consideration. But because of last night's vote, that would be some feedback that we'd be looking for from council to confirm that we should continue to move this forward to public hearing. If council's not interested or in continuing this code, then we can put a pause button on it.
Explain what the planning commission's no vote was about, or?
So the planning commission is basically a policy advisory board to the city council. So, on land use code matters, including front setbacks, really their role is to review those, provide feedback to staff, and then ultimately make a recommendation to council to either approve or disapprove the code change. So their vote was to recommend not approving, the council not approve the code, but ultimately the council is the legislative body of the city. So, it's council's prerogative if they want to,
And what was the reasoning for the non-approval recommendation?
As Alex said, there was some concern about, this front yard reduced setback would bring homes closer to the road and make things feel more crowded. There was also some concerns raised that this is basically allowing developers to put larger homes on our existing lots, which would basically be, making them money, and the city doesn't get anything out of that. I think to try and summarize their comments.
Thank you.
Any further questions? And then do we want direction?
No.
Yep. So if council is able and willing, we would look to that for some direction on if we should bring this back for a public hearing or if we should push pause on this.
No, I think we should bring it back for a public hearing.
Yes, public
Yeah.
hearing. Mm.
Councilor Cerveny?
I guess that begs the question, are we going to begin looking at changing the code every time a developer has a complaint or has an issue? And the other concern is after you have a voluntary planning commission, go through the process of coming up with code and language that was suitable for the other development around town. We're kind of going in a circular motion, and to me, in this day and age, do we need more residential? Or why is this a pressing issue? It just seems as if we're letting a developer drive the actions versus the actual planning commission in a more holistic approach would be my concern.
Any other comments?
I guess my thoughts, I don't disagree with you at all. But the developers are also the ones that know what the market needs are and what is going to sell.
I understand that, but right now, are we getting the cart before the horse? Is my only concern. Right now, we're looking for economic development, business development, and does it really behoove us to go through this whole process all over again for, it just sets a precedent is my concern.
Brian, we're looking at redoing some of the code, even up at the junction and Timmins Landing and such as well, right? Because some of that code is kind of doesn't work, correct?
Yes, we have the junction code that's been in place for 7 or 8 years now. And we've received some feedback from property owners and developers that have looked at that area, that code is pretty challenging to implement. So that's something that we're going to be going to work on. The next code actually to the MDR density transfer, was another code that was, came about from some several developer comments sort of hitting on the same piece. So, staff, I think in my time here, we've been trying to kind of hear feedback and make, what staff thinks is logical changes to code based on, not necessarily one developer's feedback, but if we're hearing the same thing multiple times, we're trying to, listen. We do have a provision in our code to allow developers to actually propose draft code, but that's something that I haven't really seen used here, and I haven't really seen it used in other jurisdictions. It's a sort of a unique opportunity that we have here, but some developers are reticent to dip their toe in actually writing code. So if we are hearing something like, for example, the next one, I don't want to again steal Alex's thunder, but we're hearing heard from multiple developers that the lack of ability to transfer density in from undevelopable portions of sites in the MDR zones is really making it not feasible to develop those areas. So, that's kind of what spearheaded staff to start taking a look at that.
So developers do help drive our code, right? It's not just the people that are working in the planning commission. They're taking that information, and then they're taking the information that they're getting from Mr. Spoo and his team, and then the developers and designing. So in a way, the developers still do help design the code that's there. And from what I witnessed in some of the stuff that I've been involved with in the short time I've been sitting in this seat, is that developers have come up in a certain area and they can't make any money. So they walk away. And that has happened in this particular area already once, and we're talking about huge developments. So I just want to make sure the council is aware of all that when they are making their decisions up here to push forward or to hold.
Well, and my thought on that is we're either in support of growth and development or we're not. We can't pick and choose individually. Well, we do. I guess that's what we are doing, is picking and choosing. But you know, I don't think that any of the area that we're talking about here is even eligible for commercial development. So what other option is there than housing? And the city does benefit from it, not to the extent that they would from a commercial or a retail development. So I don't know. Again, I think they know what people are going to buy, and even though at some point you have to, more people are going to have to move here. So
I guess one other point I'll add as council's making this consideration is, when we hear something, these developers are working in, multiple jurisdictions in the county and throughout the area. So a lot of times they'll say, hey, we're able to do this pretty much everywhere else. For example, these reduced front yard setbacks, why can't we do that here? And so, when we start this process, we go out and look at what other jurisdictions are doing and kind of, see where we stack up. And if it's something that, that it seems to be relatively common, then it's, kind of lends credibility to maybe that's something that we should at least consider.
Well, it doesn't look like these are going to be inexpensive houses. So the people are going to have a choice to buy there or not buy there. I think it would be different if it was something that was supposed to be affordable housing or any of the other concerns that always come up. Nobody's forcing anybody to buy those residents.
Mayor, a process point, if that could. So tonight's presentation is a first look to familiarize you with a proposal that could come before you at a public hearing for your decision making. So I think tonight, partly what we're looking for is direction on whether or not you want this proposal to be put on the agenda for the public hearing. At the public hearing, of course, you can engage in this discussion of the pros and cons of the proposed amendment to the code. To move it forward or to have you give that direction, we're going to need 3 votes in favor of scheduling it on the agenda for a hearing. So I wanted to, no, it's 3. The majority of the council is 3. It's not 2 out of 3. Yeah, it takes the majority of the council, and that's 3 votes. So, so that's it. Just I wanted, it's a great discussion, but again, if we're going to act on this, it'd be at a public hearing where you can have more information and more discussion.
Okay, thank you, Bronson. So I guess we're going to take a vote on a first look, which is kind of unique.
Well, I think so. I mean, again, it's whether or not council wants this put on the agenda, and it's the council's decision as to what they want on their agenda or not.
Okay.
Let me clarify something. The comments that I made weren't against moving forward. It was just stating for council and for the public what cycle we're going to be getting ourselves into as we move forward. And yes, I agree with all the comments that were made. Development and developers do drive code. But at the same token, I think a lot of the dialogue and perhaps the misconnect is we don't engage with our own planning commission sufficiently to give them the direction as well. And sometimes I think that gets missed, is all I'm trying to get to, is code is constantly in flux. And that's driven by the economy and developers. So I think, we all have to go into it with our eyes wide open, that we're always going to be adjusting the code. That's why things change. That's why the public gets into a furor. And, it just happens. We can't throw down the gauntlet and say, we can't change this. It happens, and we all have to adjust to it. So I'm not saying let's not move forward. I'm just saying let's have our eyes wide open as we do.
Thank you, Councilor Cerveny. Okay, at this point, let's What type of vote would you like on this one, Bronson?
I'm sorry.
What type of vote would you like on this?
Just direction from the council. Do we have 3 council members who want to see this on a future agenda?
All right.
Yes.
It's important that we keep moving forward.
Okay.
Yes.
We got 3 that have agreed to it. Brian, we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Bronson. Thank you, Alec.
Okay, thank you. So since we're proceeding with the item, that will be on public hearing September 27th. Yes. We have noticed that, and then this item as well will be going to public hearing with the City Council on September 27th. So I'll proceed with the MDR 16 density code update. As Brian was foreshadowing, a lot of developers, especially off of La Center Road and West La Center, have approached development to develop property over there, and there's a lot of different restrictions in the MDR 16 code that kind of precludes development to proceed. The major crux is there's a limitation that multifamily dwellings, such as apartments, cannot be permitted in more than 10 dwelling units, which limits the site to achieve the minimum net density. So a lot of developers are coming in and proposing apartments, and most apartments exceed 10 units, and they see this code and they basically walk away. So this has spurred this code update to A, get rid of that provision, but B, take a holistic look at this code, MDR 16, and see the different holes and where we can not only cater to developers, but also make it easier to develop lands, and also protect critical areas, because a lot of areas that are left to build right now have large amounts of critical areas. And so we are updating our density transfer code for critical areas to protect critical areas, but also transfer that density or that buildable land that was lost due to the critical areas and move it over towards actually developable. And so the changes we're proposing with this code update, we're revising definitions for detached, attached, duplex, triplex, fourplex, and multifamily dwellings for clarity between different residential uses and consistency with the La Center Municipal Code. There's just a lot of different inconsistencies in the use terminology that's being used across the different zones. So we updated the definitions for that, and also just the use term itself throughout the code. The next update is we revised LDR 7.5, or the low density residential density transfer. And I'll go a little bit more into this later. Currently, it allows up to 10% of lots in a development for single family detached development to be as small as 6,000 square feet. The minimum lot size is 7,500 square feet, but when you're using the density transfer, when you're protecting critical areas, as of now, only 10% of your total development, when using that transfer, can reduce their lot size down to 6,000 square feet. So we're proposing to up that to 20%. And then for the medium density residential units or zone, we're eliminating the 10 unit clustering limitation that I just discussed for multifamily developments. This will be limited because, again, if you limit multifamily to 10 units or less, a lot of times they don't even meet the minimum net density required for MDR 16 zone, which is 8 units per net acre. And so we're eliminating that provision, but there also will be they'll be guided and will by the maximum net density allowed in the zone. So even though we're getting rid of the minimum unit count, there will be limited by the unit count that they could actually build because of maximum net density allowed in the zone, which we're proposing to be 16 units per acre, and also landscaping requirements, height requirements. There's other provisions in the code that will limit them from just building a huge apartment complex that is unregulated by code. So that's the other end of us getting rid of that 10 unit maximum. And then As I just said, we're proposing to increase the net density allowed for multifamily developments from 14 to 16 units per net acre. Our comprehensive plan and the MDR 16 code itself says that the purpose of the MDR code is to allow up to a maximum net density of 16 units per net acre. And so we just see that there's a little wiggle room from bumping from 14 to 16 to actually actualize what the intent of the zone is. And then another provision we're amending, there's a current code provision in the MDR 16 chapter that a site with a project site that's 5 acres or larger can only provide a maximum of 75% of a single product type. When you really think about that, and developers have come to this over and over, when they have a 5 or 10 acre site, it's really hard to provide, for example, 75% of it being single family detached, and then the remaining 25% being duplexes or townhomes, just because there's so many site constrictions, with a small site. So we're increasing that threshold to be 15 acres in the current draft code. But as of last night, that's been amended with a recommendation by the Planning Commission, which I'll go back to at the end of this presentation on this matter. And then we are amending the density transfer for critical areas in 18-300-130, which 18-300 is the critical areas code, and the 130 actually includes the density transfer provisions for critical areas. We're specifying that this transfer can only occur in the low density residential, medium density residential, professional, and mixed use zoning districts. Because as the current code, it's only allowed in the LDR zone. And so we're expanding this to all zones that allow residential uses. And then we revised the density transfer calculations with a credit that's calculated at the minimum net density allowed in the zone for the total acreage of protected areas and buffers. So for example, a MDR 16 zone site has 2 acres of critical areas. The minimum net density allowed in MDR 16 is 8 units per net acre. So if you do 8 units per net acre, which is the minimum density, times 2 acres of critical areas protected, that means that the credit is 16 units that they can transfer to the developable portion of the site, just as a hypothetical situation. And then again, going back to what I said earlier, we are updating in this section of code for the LDR 7.5 zone where 20% individual lots may be as small as 6,000 square feet, but also they can't exceed a maximum allowed density of 6.5 units per acre in the LDR 7.5 zone. And then for the MDR 16 zone, they can't exceed a maximum net density by product type. So for multifamily, that's 18 units per acre. Single family attached, it's 16 units per acre. Single family detached, 14 units per acre. And then for manufactured home parks and subdivisions, that's also 14 units per net acre. And then essentially, there's no known budget impacts with this. There is potential for a marginal increase in the city's property tax receipts over the long run because we're allowing increased net density on developable portions of the land. And then comments from the Planning Commission hearing that occurred last night. They are forwarding a recommendation for approval to City Council, but this included some amendments to our draft code. The first included a definition for accessory dwelling units in Chapter 1840, which is the definition section of the code. Our updated definition for single-family attached includes ADUs, accessory dwelling units, in that definition, but we don't have a definition for accessory dwelling units located in the definitions code. It's actually located in the ADU code chapter itself. So we're just taking that definition and plugging it into 1840 where all the other definitions are located. And then also back to that product mixing requirement where a MDR 16 project of 5 acres or larger has to provide a maximum of 75% of one product type. We proposed 15 acres, but now Planning Commission is recommending 10 acres for that threshold. Again, there's no motion at this time. This will be brought forth to the City Council hearing on September 27th for a final decision. Any questions?
Any questions?
No.
All right. Thank you, Alec. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great report. Very thorough.
Yes, thank
Definitely.
you.
Okay, that brings us to the consent agenda. There are no requests for any items to be removed. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Thank you, council. Next up is the mayor's report. The mayor's Q&A session will be Wednesday, September 20th at 5:30 p.m. here at City Hall. I encourage all those that wish to attend to please come. It's a chance to really grill me and ask lots of questions. I will tell you the last one that I did in June was widely successful considering that it was the same night that scholarships were being awarded at the high school. I think we had 10 to 15 people, and Bob and I both took a beating. It was good. Or sorry, Chief Richardson. So I do encourage you to attend that. I would like to thank the Cowlitz Police Department. They, on their own, came down on the first day of school and let the presence be known that there are police there patrolling, looking for speeders during the school hours. So thank you very much. I also want to remind you that there will be a blood drive on September 26th from the city. And Maria, is that here at City Hall? Is that where we're doing that? Okay, here at City Hall. So please, there is a blood shortage. I received a phone call today, a huge one. They're even giving out all sorts of craziness just to get people to come down and donate blood. So I would also like to thank the school for the presentations. It was very nicely done, a little different than normal, which was great. It was really good. Thank you very much. And fall is here, so I do want to remind people to contact the city if you're seeing any leaves blocking the drainages. We can't be everywhere, so we rely on citizens to do the reporting to help us out. Next up is the attorney's report. Mr. Bronson? Potter.
Mayor, you'd asked if I would just comment on the receipt of the Form F7 that we received from the Teamsters Union. And so I'll do that if you wish.
Sure.
So our collective bargaining agreement with the Teamsters Union expires December 31 this year. And we received a form that's called a Form F7. It's a form that the union sent to the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Services Agency, that's a federal agency that provides mediation and arbitration services when you're in labor negotiations. Sending that form is required by federal statute if you intend to modify or terminate a collective bargaining agreement. Here, the notice is to modify, and that has to be sent in at least 60 days before the expiration date of the agreement. So it's just simply a form that we received from the union saying, Federal Mediation Conciliation Services, here we are. We have an agreement that's due to expire. We intend to modify the agreement, and the city was copied with that. So that's what that was about.
Thank you, Bronson. Appreciate it. Any questions for the city attorney? Thanks again, Bronson. Next up, council comments. Councilmember Kasberg.
You know what? Tonight's a long enough one anyway, so thanks everybody for being here, and it was a really good presentations that we had tonight. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Councilmember Leija.
I would like to bring attention to this last Monday, which was September 11th. And I think none of us will ever forget that day, that morning, and the planes flying into the buildings. It did unify a nation for a couple of years, but we should never forget that happened. The other thing I read in the newspaper about this Healing Animal Partners program that's through Lifeline Connections. And so I called up one of the social workers and actually went Monday night to this ranch. It's a La Center address, but it's about 7 miles out in the country. And they have horses, and it's a wonderful program. She explained it to me that it's mostly for veterans, but anyone can attend, I believe. And they use horses for just emotional support and helping the veterans. Whereas if you go see a psychiatrist, oftentimes the program will force the person to go back and relive the trauma that they went through. And a lot of times that doesn't work well. But coming out and working with these horses really helps the veterans. And so I really highly recommend, if you know anyone that has post-traumatic stress syndrome, especially a veteran, that this is a wonderful program for them. And if you would like to know anything more about it, I do have a flyer about that, and I really encourage that. And I think it's a wonderful thing to help veterans like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Cerveny.
Everything I had on my list has already been mentioned this evening, but thank you everyone for coming. And to follow up on the school getting back in session, times can be difficult for our youth, so be there, have your ears open and your hearts, and be willing to help wherever needed. Mental health is something that oftentimes, even today, still doesn't get addressed, get talked about. I grew up in a family in which my mom battled her entire life with mental health issues, and it was never talked about. And that's hard on not only the individual that's living through it, but the entire family. So reach out and be there for your neighbors and friends in the community so we can create a healthier one at the same time. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up, staff reports. Brian Cast will present the Public Works and Community Development staff report. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'll try and keep this brief and just hit the highlights. If you also notice, I've moved away from the red line text technique that I started about a year or so ago, because basically everything was new and red. We've been trying to keep these a little bit more to the point, so it was kind of distracting to read. So on the public works and street side, the crew is currently doing some crack sealing, started on 5th. They're working throughout the downtown area, sealing cracks, which is one of the low-cost pavement treatments we were talking about earlier to help extend the lives of our streets. On the park side, as of Labor Day, the splash pad is down for the season, so crew will be putting that to bed for the winter, removing the equipment and winterizing the pumps. We also have a irrigation leak over at Sternwheeler that's currently under repair. That's why the ground's all torn up over there. It's not on the list, but we also have an irrigation leak or sprinkler zone issue over at Heritage Park that's caused some soft ground that we're working on dealing with as well. On the administration side for Public Works, I just wanted to tout that our safety committee is back in action. There was extended gap in safety committee meetings after COVID and with staff turnover, but we have that program back up and going, and they've been meeting regularly. And then our new safety skills software has really been helping our staff track trainings and certifications and all those things, and keeping it in one place so that we can demonstrate if we ever have an issue that we have done the training that we need to do. Over on the wastewater side, everything's going well. We're all within permit compliance, and we have completed our quarterly cleaning of lift stations and our collection system. Also not on the list, but we've been working on purchasing of a used jetter trailer that will allow us to be able to go and do some of this line cleaning ourselves with our own crew and equipment rather than having to outsource that. City of Ridgefield has a piece of equipment that they're going to be surplusing. So we've agreed to a price on that. It fits within our existing budget. So hopefully we'll be able to pick that piece of equipment up and be able to do some of this work ourselves. On the engineering side, DJ&A engineering firm is working on our horizontal safety improvements. That's a grant that we received. We have a cost proposal from them, and we're working on a WashDOT agreement that's being reviewed by WashDOT because those are federal funds. This WashDOT has to be our certified agency to make sure that we're following all the federal requirements. But as that's wrapped up, you will see that on the consent agenda here in probably the next meeting. On the
Brian,
yes,
Dennis, your wife is locked out.
Now he's in trouble. On the health, or on the community center kitchen, we have completed our health department and fire department approval, and I understand as of this afternoon, the punch list items that were outstanding for our final approval for the building department have been completed. We held an orientation with the Meals on Wheels staff earlier this week, and we are planning on doing a orientation for volunteers that serve the Meals on Wheels group next week sometime, and the kitchen is planned to be open the week of the 25th for the first Meals on Wheels event. On the building side, to date, we have processed 252 building permits this year, including 80 new single-family homes.
Real quick, Brian
Yes.
and Maria, do we have a ribbon cutting ceremony or anything planned for that?
Yes, so we are actually working on that with our new state lobbyist. As you all know, we received state earmark funds to construct that project. With our former legislative delegation, we're now in a different district, so we're hoping to use this ribbon event not only as a celebration of the new kitchen, but also to thank the legislators that helped get those funds for us and show off that we're a good agency to invest in with our new delegation so that we can hopefully continue to receive funds for projects like this.
Thank you, Brian.
So as we have a date for that, we'll definitely keep council in the loop. Moving over to the community development staff report, just a couple items here. Number one on the map, Lockwood Meadows subdivision. Construction is proceeding. They have wrapped up sanitary sewer work and are now working on their storm work. They're working on that pond out front of along Lockwood Creek to get it all final graded and seeded so that it is stabilized for the oncoming raining season. Minute Management out at the freeway, they're continuing to work on the building out there, and just received approval on the mechanical platform. There was some changes to that that had to go through some additional review that wasn't part of the original plan set that was submitted. We just got them signed off to proceed with that work yesterday. Number 37, Aces View, which is directly adjacent to the middle school. They are working on grading out there and getting started on sewer construction. And then there's a couple pre-apps that we've had here recently that I wanted to draw attention to. First is number 67 on the list, the Breezy Creek subdivision, which is a 15-lot, would be a 15-lot subdivision just to the sort of southwest of Holly Park and just west of the Holly Park subdivision. So the road that currently dead ends there would be extended to a cul-de-sac to serve those 15 homes. And then number 68 on the list, the Timmins Landing subdivision. This would be a combination of 32 townhomes and 104 apartments, along with a pool and community center to serve those areas. So we have worked with the applicant trying to figure out their access. That's kind of a challenging site to access, being up on top of the hill there. But we've given them some feedback, and we'll see if they come back for a permit submittal on that. happy to answer any questions that the council might have.
Any questions for Brian?
Do you have the date for that ribbon cutting you were just talking about?
No, we haven't set a date
Okay.
yet. We'll keep you in the loop.
Thank you, Brian. Great report. We do have a resolution tonight. That resolution is 2023-471, annexation. Mr. Ethan Spoo will be presenting.
All right, good evening. I'll try and be as brief as possible because I know, as some have said, it's a fairly long night already. So the city received an application for annexation on August 4th of this year. The applicant for that request is Mr. Edward Barnhart. And the property in question is located on the northwest side of downtown. So if I can get the clerk to scroll to page 176 of the agenda packet, it shows a map of this. There you go. So this probably goes without stating, but annexation is the process whereby the city brings new land into its boundaries. And that involves, annexation also involves new service obligations for the city. So providing things like parks and roads road maintenance to this property if it were to be annexed, assuming there's would be public roads in here. It also creates service obligations for special districts like the school district, for instance. But the flip side of that is it also brings new streams of revenue to the city in the form of property taxes. And perhaps most significantly, the main reason that folks, property owners, choose to annex is to create development potential on their properties. The particular annexation process that we're talking to you about and that this applicant is using is called the 60% petition process. This meeting here tonight is the 10% petition, and so the applicant has filed a petition showing that they control or that they have signatures from at least 10% property owners representing 10% of the assessed value of that area. This is a single property, and one property owner owns all of it, so they own 100% of that property. The next stage in the annexation process, if council chooses to accept this annexation petition, would be to move on to that 60% petition process, which the applicant could start that process at any time really after tonight, assuming that the council chooses to accept this annexation petition. Just a couple of quick details for you on this property, and if we can scroll down one page here, that's the aerial photo of the property. As you can see, areas close, the property borders the East Fork of the Lewis River, and there's a lot of forested areas bordering the river. Scroll down just one or two more maps here. This is the city's comprehensive plan map, and so the area of this property closest to the river is designated public facilities and open space, and then that upland area is designated urban residential. So that's designated to come in as residential use and residential zoning. In terms of the public facilities, that's obviously a major issue for annexation. You want to be able to show that you can serve the property. The short story on that is that there are water and sewer lines adjacent to the property in 5th Street and Golden Eagle Avenue. Stormwater for the property would discharge in the East Fork of the Lewis River, most likely with approval from the Army Corps of Engineers. And access would likewise be from 5th Street or Golden Eagle Avenue, both of which stub into the property. So there's three things that we're asking you to consider and that council is required to consider at this 10% petition stage. The first of those is whether the council will accept, reject, or geographically modify the annexation. If the council accepts this annexation, it will authorize the applicant to go out and gather signatures from property owners who can own 60% of the assessed value. Of course, as we said before, this is one property owner who owns 100%. If council chose to reject this petition, then this would be the end of the annexation process for this applicant. If you chose to geographically modify that, that would expand the annexation area possibly to include some adjacent properties to the north, which is not something that we're proposing to you tonight. The second thing that council is required to consider is whether the city will apply a city zoning designation upon annexation, and that's pretty much true in every single case under annexation. So if this property were to be annexed, it would receive a city zone on it. There's a couple of choices here, and we're not asking you to make this choice tonight. But the two zones that line up with that urban residential comprehensive plan designation are low density residential 7.5, which is primarily meant for single family detached homes, sometimes duplexes, or MDR 16 zoning, which is medium density residential. And that could be anything from single family detached to townhouses to apartments. We will come back to you, assuming that you vote to approve this request or accept this request and the annexation moves forward. We'll come forward at the 60% petition stage with more information on what we think the appropriate zone would be to apply at that time of annexation. Just so you know, the applicant has expressed their intent to have this zoned medium density residential MDR 16. The last thing that you're required to consider is whether to apply or require that the property assume its portion of city indebtedness. And what that means is if the city has any debts outstanding, primarily in the form of bonds, then this property would be required to assume a portion of that, just like every other property in the city helps pay down the city's bonds. I'm not aware of any bonds that the city has outstanding at this time, but in the future case that the city issues a general obligation bond, for instance, for new infrastructure or something like this, this property would help pay that down if it were annexed, just like every other property in the city. So we do have a resolution for you, and that encapsulates what I just said, those three points: accepting, rejecting, or geographically modifying, applying city zoning upon annexation, and assuming indebtedness upon annexation. The final and optional motion that you could make, that we're making a recommendation on, is to require the applicant to prepare a fiscal impact analysis. A fiscal impact analysis would require that the applicant take a look at all of the different revenue streams that the property would generate if it were developed, in a certain way, for instance, with residential units, and compare those to the service costs, and kind of see where the balance is. And again, that's an optional motion that you could make. So you could either choose to require that or not require that. Are there any questions?
Yes. So back on that map where you showed the green area and the yellow area, as when it's designated as public open space, does that mean that that area is not buildable at all?
That's correct. It could be a city park or some sort of public facility, but it wouldn't be developable as residential use.
So if this property owner wants to sell to a developer, but it looks like a little bit less than half of his property is actually developable, who's obligated to buy that other part of it?
Well, in my experience, and this is kind of getting into areas that don't specifically fall under land use planning and development, but in my experience, a developer would offer the property owner less money for that because it's not developable. I should have mentioned in my presentation that that area is encumbered by critical areas. So there's floodplain in that area, and there's a buffer, a riparian buffer from the river in that area, as well as some slopes. So that's the reason why that designation is, showing that way in that area. So it's likely difficult to develop anyways, even if the comp plan designation were changed in that area. The property owner could apply later on to have that designation change, for instance, next year in the the annual comprehensive plan update, if they wanted to change that, and they thought that some of that area was developable, they could apply to change that subsequent to annexation.
Do we currently have resources to manage that additional land?
I'll chime in there. I think to answer your first question, it's all one piece of property. So if someone buys it, they buy both parts. As we, assuming this property is annexed and it comes into the city and the property owner chooses to develop, we'd work with them on what that park looks like and whether it becomes, a city-owned public park or a privately owned park that's also has a public access easement like we've done in some other neighborhoods around the city.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Ethan, does this particular property have any possibility of discussions with a developer, or is there even a legal leg to stand on in terms of the zoning becoming potentially business and then incorporating that forested area into expansion of the city parks as well?
I think there's kind of two aspects of that question. One is a question about whether that property is marketable as a commercial property, and I can't answer that question.
Well, you see some properties, and I don't mean to butt in here, but as research campuses, for example, where tech companies specifically target properties that are more amenable to what they do and the research aspect of it, but also close to proximity to parks and trail lands for the benefit of their employees as well. But that could, in fact, become a win-win for the community in terms of not only expansion to the park system and trail system, but that type of retail or business type tax benefit than additional residential.
Mm-hmm.
Is just kind of, one of those harebrained thoughts that come across.
Councilor Cerveny, I got to tell you, that wasn't harebrained. Actually, the note I made down here was to talk about commercial and that same piece of property that you were talking about, or something along that range.
Well, it's one of those situations in this community where we won't have the opportunity to have that type of dialogue with parcels like this, and it's close to the river. So if in fact we look at it from take a few steps back and look at it from a broader perspective and a long-term benefit to the community, would we behoove ourselves by looking at something like that instead of just residential?
Yeah, so there's some process I think that we should talk about there. So the request before you tonight is for annexation, and then at that 60% stage, the applicant working in the city council could choose to apply some city zone to this property. The city zones that line up with the comprehensive plan designation of urban residential, as I said earlier, are residential zones that primarily don't allow commercial uses. So after annexation, the applicant, one option is that the applicant could come back. If they wanted commercial development on their property, they could request a comprehensive plan amendment next year, and then a corresponding commercial zone to go with that. If the council wanted to explore the possibility of designating this for commercial use, prior, I think it would, Bronson, you may have to chime in here a little bit, but that would probably have to occur prior to annexation, which means that you would reject the petition that's before you tonight, look at redesignating the property next year in the annual comprehensive plan amendment process. And that would sort of give the community a greater hand in what the ultimate use of that property would be, but that would probably raise some concerns with the property owner.
My neighbor, yes.
Right.
No, I just wasn't sure whether by taking either of these motions that would lock us into one way or the other. I just wanted to pose the question up front as to what our overall options were.
So tonight's action is accepting the notice of intent to annex. And I don't think taking either of the options here, A or B, really impacts the comprehensive plan designation or zoning tonight.
Okay.
And to answer your question, Ethan, I think even if we move forward with an annexation with the current designation, it doesn't preclude later modifying the comp plan, either by applicate, the property owner applying for a comp plan and zoning change, or the council doing it on its own initiative.
The one question, and you're welcome to correct me on this, Bronson, but if the applicant, subsequent to annexation at the 60% stage, let's say that's in a couple of months, the applicant files a development application, which the city is required to consider for residential development, then at that time, the opportunity for the property to be a commercial use,
Right, would not exist.
Right.
Yeah.
Thus the quagmire.
Any other questions? Seeing how there is no other questions, can I get a motion?
That's a lot to read.
It's only 8:18. You'll be done in about 10.
Yeah. Mayor, I move that the council adopt resolution 2023-471, accepting the Barnhart notice of intent to annex parcel 209479000 without geographic modifications, requiring that the subject property assume its proportionate share of the city's indebtedness and acknowledging that the subject property would be subject to a city zoning designation upon annexation.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. And since this is a resolution, I'd like a roll call vote. Please, clerk.
Councilmember Kasberg,
Yes.
Councilmember Leija,
Yes.
Councilmember Cerveny.
Yes.
All right, motion passes. Thank you, council. Thank you, Ethan. Great report and presentation. All right, next up, unfinished business. Do we have any unfinished business? How about new business? No new business? All right. Can I get a motion to close the meeting?
I make a motion that we close the meeting.
Second.
All right. It has been moved in second. All those in favors?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Thank you, council. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Meeting is adjourned.